Hello, lovely people of the internet, and welcome to episode 2 of the NovelTea Knitting Podcast. My name is Emma, here to talk to you about all things knitting, bookish, basically anything cozy that takes my fancy. So, grab a cup of tea, and let's get started. So this is going to be a very whip-heavy episode, and definitely not a heavy finished object-heavy episode, because the only thing that I have finished is all of my slippers. There are 10 pairs of slippers that I finished, everything for all my entire immediate family, and then for Taylor and her husband. And I will not be telling you guys which pair of slippers is for whom, even though I'm going to show you all of them because I am quite proud, because I do want that to be a surprise, although I'm assuming probably everyone will be able to guess which one is theirs, but maybe not. I've thrown a few curveballs in there as well as terms of color combos go. So, we've got pair number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You can see that this one is definitely the most scrappy. 8, 9, and 10. And this one is very clearly the least scrappy because I actually knit this one last year and completely forgot about it. This is what my slippers would usually look like, just one solid color all throughout, but I really had fun with trying to figure out color combinations with these. So I think I might stick to the scrappy style in the future, though maybe not quite so hardcore as this. These are all leftovers from my baby blanket project, so all of these colors are, things that I would put in a baby blanket. So there's lots of pastels, lots of pinks. That definitely is a little bit more complicated to mix than, say, just a few select colors that I have chosen. So all that's left to do is really take pictures of them, which I am terrible at. I am so bad at taking pictures of my finished objects and updating the Ravelry. I have updated my Ravelry so that the project is a finished project, but I have not put pictures on yet, which I will do. This is me holding myself accountable. Emma, you will update the Ravelry with pictures. Yep. Okay, now just to put them all back. Please let me know, number 1 through 10, which one is your favorite of my scrappy slippers. I think this one is my favorite. Got purple and blue, and I just really like the way that this bright yellow and bright orange goes with this purple. It looks blue. It looks super blue in this light. I have no idea why. Oh dear. That's purple. Believe it or not, that's purple. I will put up a photo of these slippers so you can actually see what color they are. Are you getting up? Yeah? Are you getting up in the middle of my shoot? Oh, you can't sleep there. Mama's got a film. You want me to set you up a little nest? If I set you up a little nest, will you be happy? Coming back? Say, Mama, I love you too much. I don't want to be parted from you. Aww. I'm gonna steal the show, you know that? Lena, lay down. Good girl. So I'm very limited in finished objects, but I have plenty of works in progress. So let's get started. My first whip for today is a baby blanket. I have been working on these for so long now that I can't remember a time when I wasn't crocheting a baby blanket. But this is my last one, knock on wood. I am not aware of any of my other cousins having babies as of yet. So once I finish this one for little baby Flora, I will be able to set aside my crochet hook at last. I have been trying to do about 5 rows a day. Each one of these stripes is 5 rows, so it's a really easy counter. and it means that I only have to carry around one skein of yarn at a time. I am really loving these colors together. I'm really, really pleased with how this turned out. I was a little bit worried about the salmon-y color, the coral color, and how it would fit in with the others. But I'm pretty pleased with it. I'm pretty pleased with how it's been turning out. I have been thinking about writing up a pattern for this. It would just be a free pattern because it's a super basic crochet style. It's just a shell stitch. I was thinking about writing up a pattern because this is a pattern based on what my grandma used to make for me when I was a baby. Well, it's based on a pattern that she had crocheted for me. And so I would like that to live on, and I don't know if I'm going to have children who end up wanting to crochet at all. So I definitely want to have that for posterity. The problem is that I am a knitter first. I do not know how to write up a crochet pattern. If anyone has any advice, please let me know down in the comments. I don't really know how to even start with a crochet pattern. I will try and write that up relatively soon, but I do have a bunch of other stuff that's taking priority, namely my other whips. Look at that segue. Oh, I'm so good at this. So my main other whip is, of course, my Schnee Cardigan. I have gotten so much progress done on this in the last 2 weeks. I finished the front panel, I connected everything, and I have gotten a ton done on the, just the body of the sweater. All of that is what I have done on the body, and then I also have done this entire front panel was not here when I last spoke with you. So I'm extremely pleased with how that's going. I have taken some pictures in it so far. I will pop 1 or 2 of those up here. I'm really, really happy with it. However, I am very concerned that I'm going to be playing a very dangerous game of yarn chicken. I purchased this yarn 3 or 4 years ago. I think it's 4 years ago at this point. And I know that the dyer, Bumblebee Acres, I know that they still dye this colorway, or at least I'm pretty sure. And if they don't, I'm positive that I could still request some and then that they would accommodate me. I am not confident that the dye lots would be close enough. As a refresher, real quick, I am holding 2 skeins of this Bumblebee Acres yarn together to make a DK weight. It is their Coquette sock base, so it's a Corriedale yarn with a little bit of nylon, I think, mixed in. Yes, it is 75% Corriedale and 25% nylon. But it's been a great to work with. It has not, like, it doesn't split. It's been really, really easy. The thing that has been hard about this sweater has definitely been the fact that it's a knit purl pattern. So back and forth, knit purl, because of the moss stitch. So the body is very slow going. But the body is not what I'm worried about right now, because I am worried about running out of yarn and not having enough to do the full arm length that I want. This pattern does call for a neckband, so I definitely don't have enough to do the whole neck and button band in this yarn, as well as the edging at the bottom, or the ribbing at the bottom and the ribbing at the cuffs. So I am going to switch to a different yarn. Actually, I've got some of it right here behind me. So I'm going to be using this Swish DK in Garnet Heather. I absolutely just love mixing reds and greens, not only because, as you will very quickly learn, I am obsessed with Christmas, but also because I just think it's a really good combination. Especially this is, if it can be said to be Christmassy, it's very subtly Christmassy. So I think that I will definitely be able to wear this basically anytime, except when it gets into the awful degrees of summer. Ugh, I don't even want to think about that. But I am about a third of the way through the second skein that I've been working with, and I have 2 more skeins left. But so technically I started this project with 6 skeins, which amounted to 3 skeins because I'm holding everything double. So I already finished the first skein, The second skein, like I said, I'm about a third of the way through already, and then I have one skein left. I love a really wide sleeve, and I want to be able to make it so that it's like, I think it's called a bishop sleeve, where it just like poofs out and then gets really small at the bottom. And in order to do that, I need a lot of yarn left. So I'm going to put the body on a holder very soon, and I'm actually going to switch to sleeve knitting, I think, because I want to make sure that I have enough to get the sleeves that I want, because that's more important to me than getting the body length that I prefer. The body length is still important to me, but I can always make up for that with like extra ribbing at the bottom, which I can do in this Garnet Heather Swish DK yarn. Hopefully by the next time you see me, I will have at least one sleeve done, so I will know exactly how much yarn, or approximately how much yarn it will take to do both sleeves, and I will know how much yarn I'll have left for the body. I'm hoping that the sleeves will only take one skein in total, so 50% of a skein each, or half a skein each, and that way I have plenty left over for the body. But we'll see. I am hopeful. Cautiously optimistic. Cautiously optimistic, I feel like, has been just my life lately. Cautiously optimistic about books that I'm reading. Cautiously optimistic about, you know, the pandemic. Cautiously optimistic about my sweater. Now, as far as my raindrop socks go, I have made zero progress. Literally none. I have rethought a couple aspects of the pattern, so that's actually going to make knitting them a little bit easier. I was intending to add a cable into these socks, like along the back edge of the sock, and I decided that that just didn't really make sense for the pattern. So that will make it just a little bit easier if there's no cable. But I'm saying right now, my goal for the next episode is to have at least the leg done on one of these socks, so you can count on progress in the next episode. Now, for the whip that I am most excited to show you guys, I teased it last week, but I have reason to share with you now, is my Scrappy Blanket. You guys are not ready for this. Now, first of all, before I get started, the reason that I have to share this with you is because of this lovely basket, actually. So Michael and I made an IKEA trip last weekend because I needed a new bookshelf. Michael needed some new shelves. We've still been getting these two rooms that we use, as Michael uses his office and I use this room as a studio, basically, and we have still been getting the final touches done for both those rooms. So we went to IKEA. As with any trip to IKEA, we came home with much more than we expected to come home with. One of the things for me was this basket. But I tell you what, this basket brings me so much joy. I can finally see my Scrappy Blanket. I have been meaning to get a big basket for my Scrappy Blanket for ages, but anytime I come across like a wicker basket, they're always so expensive, and I needed a really big one because the Scrappy Blanket is enormous already and it's only gonna get bigger. This one was perfect, and it was only, I think, like $20, which I thought was extremely reasonable for something that was gonna bring me this much joy. So my Scrappy Blanket, guys, I have been working on this since 2018, so it's already pretty big. I have had plenty of people tell me that my goal for the size of it is like either unrealistic or maybe a bit foolish, but I don't care. In my mind, I'm only about a third of the way done with this blanket. So let's just take a gander, shall we? It's, yeah, massive. Let me move the... Oh dear. I just love seeing it on camera. Oh, it's so pretty. I just am in love with the progression of this blanket. Maybe I should wait until it's not in front of my face so that I can talk. I love how the colors have changed subtly as I've gotten more open to brighter colors. When I first started, you can tell I had an extremely muted palette. I liked pretty dark colors. I have definitely grown to enjoy a lot more brighter colors. Some of the brightness in this blanket, admittedly, is due to advent calendars. This whole section, basically, I think starting from this slightly greenish hued stripe all the way up to this pink and white stripe, is from a homespun house. I got an advent calendar from them, I think 3 years ago now? 2 years ago? 3 years ago? Who even knows? As I was opening all of these colors, they're definitely not what I would consider typically my taste. That being said, I love the way that they look in this blanket, and it has actually, seeing these in here with all of my other favorites, has definitely opened up to some more bright colors. I have gotten a little bit done recently on this blanket. I have gotten about 4 rows, 5 rows maybe. So from this little orange bit here up to the edge of the brown. Not a ton of work has gotten done on it, but because it's in my basket now, instead of before, what I had it in was a zipped up bag. It was a really big bag and it was great. It's a great storage tote and everything. But it just kept this out of sight, out of mind, as they say. And now that I can see my blanket at all times, basically, because I just keep it in this basket here right next to my couch, it is so much more accessible to me. I'm extremely excited for the next bit of this blanket. I just finished one of my Magyk skeins, and I have this one now, which is all yarn that I have purchased from Chicago Yarn Con. It was one specific trip. I think that it was 2018, 19? It must have been 2019. I didn't really have anything in particular that year that I was looking for as far as like a sweater project or a new shawl project or anything. So I just went around to all my favorite booths and picked up 1 or 2 of their mini skeins. So you have a large variety in here. This one on the top, I am super excited for. I don't remember what the yarn is called or even what the dyer is, but I will pop it here because I did save the tag somewhere. I just have to find it. So you go from this red and black and orange, really intense. And then you've got some of these blues on the inside. It'll be interesting to see what it looks like, but I'm really excited to get that in there. That was a really fun event that I really love going to every year. YarnCon has always been a really special event for me because it was a girls' trip. Taylor and I used to go every year. I think we went for 3 years straight, and obviously we weren't able to go last year, but I think also just a little bit of the magic of YarnCon was starting to die. We'd kind of seen all of the people there, and honestly, it's in a small convention center, and I just don't know if I will ever be comfortable with that again after the pandemic. I already am not a big fan of crowds. They make me very claustrophobic. Now with the pandemic, being in crowds just stresses me out even more. Not that I have been in crowds lately, but the idea of being in crowds makes me really stressed out. Anyway, while that is technically it for all the whips that I am actually currently working on, I have a very special whips sub-segment for you today. Castonitis. I am newly afflicted. I used to be so good about not wanting to cast on all the things. I was a very monogamous knitter at one time, and I would absolutely have to finish a project before I could even imagine casting on another project. But those days are long gone. I think it maybe has to do with the stash. Probably has to do with the stash. So to start, there are 4 sweaters that I want to cast on. I know, insane. But let me show you the yarn that I have for at least 3 of the sweaters, and maybe you'll understand. Yes, I have already put the yarn for this project in a bag, so really the cast on is imminent. I really love this bag too. It's got my initials monogrammed on it, a friend's mom made me this for my wedding, for when I got married, because my initials changed. Let's get right down to it. The cardigan that it's a cardigan, not a sweater, that I want to cast on is called Banff. Banff? I said that very authoritatively, but I really don't know. I think it's pronounced Banff. It's by the Blue Mouse, and I actually really love the Blue Mouse patterns. I have another one of her patterns that I'm intending to cast on as well. The Banff is just this massive, oversized cardigan. It is also in moss stitch. So basically, my wardrobe is just going to be moss-stitched cardigans, apparently. Apparently, I just really like punishment, because moss-stitch is not my forte. I have a bunch of wool of the Andes that I'm going to make this sweater out of. Now, not just green. I have a bunch of different colors. I have an entire order to them. Oops, runaway yarn. I have an entire order to them that I intend to do. I might have to, I don't know if I'm pulling them out in the right order, but it's approximately the right order. I have all these different colors. So these have all just somehow ended up in my stash. I say somehow as if I don't know exactly how they ended up in my stash. Some of it is yarn that I intended to use for stockings that I never got around to making, but all of this was actually going to be a temperature blanket. I wanted to make a big old temperature blanket for my husband and me for our first year of marriage. But by the time I actually got around to like having the amount of time that I needed to work on it and honestly, the motivation to work on it, I no longer liked these colors for temperature blankets. I thought I was being clever because I found a post somewhere that talked about doing a temperature blanket in not blues and reds. So typically a temperature blanket would be knit in reds for the hot weather and then down the color wheel into blues, which is a very wide range of colors, and it's not necessarily colors that I love. I'm still, as much as I try to say that I am in love with just color in general now, no matter what, I am not a huge fan of blues. Michael loves blues, but I am still warming up to them. So I was going to do earth tones instead. I just never started it. I was actually really surprised to find that I had enough wool of the Andes in worsted weight to make this sweater. I, first of all, didn't realize that the sweater was in worsted weight. I've had this sweater in my queue for years. I thought that it was in bulky weight, which is not a type of yarn that I buy ever, basically. So I realized it was in worsted weight. I realized I had all of this wool of the Andes that I needed to use. I debated for a while whether I really wanted to make a striped cardigan, and I decided I do. I'm going to try and do a fade. I've never done a fade before, and I don't really have instructions on how to do it, but I'm sure that either a very quick Google or fades were very popular not that long ago, so I can at the very least download a pattern that'll, I'm sure, give me the basics on how to do a fade. So that's one sweater. The other sweater that I want to do is also by the Blue Mouse. It's called Senya. I think it's pronounced Senya. It is in this garnet heather. I am hoping that I have enough to do the button band for my Schnee cardigan as well as knit this Senya, but I'm pretty sure that I will. I have, I think, something like 20 skeins of this. Even though they're only 50 grams, I have a lot of it. And then the Senya has that really beautiful detail with the triangles up for the yoke. I bought these to complement that. I think that this is all I'll need. I should only need one 50-gram skein of each of these yarns. And it will be the first color work that I have done since 2017. In 2017, I knitted stockings for my immediate family, me and my brother and my mom and my dad. By the time I finished those stockings, I was so sick of color work. And I'm pretty sure that I wasn't even doing it right. I had decided that I was going to do these color work stockings. I didn't really do a lot of research. I just kind of figured that I would get the hang of it and figure it out for myself. And I just don't think that I was switching between yarns the proper way. I don't want to get into it. I am pretty sure that I was doing it wrong, and I will definitely be doing more research before I start my next colorwork project, but I think this one will be an a relatively easy one to start with. It will also be my first yoked sweater. I have been trying to try out new types of sweater patterns so I can figure out exactly what I like and what I don't like. I know that I don't like raglan shaping. I know that I do like drop shoulder shaping. I'm really hoping that I also like the yoke shaping. I love yoke sweaters. I think they're absolutely gorgeous. I can't get enough of the intricate Fair Isle pattern, so I really hope that I like them, but we'll see. I like to be cautiously optimistic when it comes to what I will and will not like, just because of the anxiety. I don't like to get my hopes up too much, but I am really hoping that this Senya sweater, at the very least, is comfortable for me. Next up is the All the Love sweater by Joji Locatelli. We've got more stripes. I bought this yarn with the intention of making a sweater. Bravo, Emma. Actually buying a sweater's quantity yarn to knit a sweater. That's new for me. I was planning on doing my own design for a sweater, and then I knit my own design for a sweater out of some leftover Bravo worsted that I had, and I decided that I didn't have quite enough experience to knit myself my own designed pattern just yet. And I decided that I wanted to have a little bit more experience. That's why I've got all these sweaters on my list of to do, because I really want to make sure that I have set myself up to make the best possible sweater when I do properly design a sweater. So I have all of this yarn from Goosey Fibers. Goosey Fibers is a yarn dyeing company that I absolutely love to follow. I love their colors. They're so beautiful. These in particular took my fancy because they are based on Winnie the Pooh. Now, I have a weird relationship with Winnie the Pooh in that I wasn't really into it that much when I was a kid. I am sure that I had at least a little bit of influence. I know that I had some Winnie the Pooh toys, but I don't remember being like obsessed with it like I was with other things when I was a child. But I remember very little about Winnie the Pooh when I was a kid. However, I have gotten like a recent obsession with Winnie the Pooh. I think that it must just be because of how sweet and cozy those books seem to me. The color palette is very up my alley. Again, very cozy, very warm. So we have some Silly Old Bear, which is going to be my primary color, which then I intend to stripe with these 100 Acre minis. So these are all of the colors in the 100 Acre set that Goosey Fibers dyes. I have already used the mini skein of Silly Old Bear that I had in this to do a swatch. Do I know what happened to that swatch? I do, actually. I don't remember at all what needle size I used for this swatch. It does look pretty, though. Look at this. So I can't wait to knit with that. You will notice, of course, that the All the Love sweater is not striped. So I'm definitely going to be figuring that out for myself, but I think I can do that for sure. And I can't wait to use all of these squishy, lovely, wonderful yarns together. We are not done yet, folks. So I have another sweater that I really want to cast on, but I don't actually have the yarn for it yet. It is the Morning Cup sweater by Tiffany Kerr. I watched the process of this pattern being written, being test knitted, and then finally when it came out I was so excited, and I just love that yoke pattern. Again, I'm really hoping that my anxiety will allow me to wear yoke sweaters. This sweater comes in a version that is a teacup, or like a mug of tea rather than a cup of coffee, and I am so here for that. So that is at the top of my list, definitely, as far as cast-ons go, and I may or may not be browsing for yarn basically all the time for this sweater. The last thing on my list that is sure to be an imminent cast-on is some self-striping socks. I have a bunch of Felici, and yes, I have another skein of all of these, and I am just dying to cast it on. This one is for me, definitely. Maybe my mom if I'm feeling super generous. This one is going to be for my husband, Michael. And this one is probably going to be for me too. I have just not gotten around to casting these on. I'm actually waiting, I think I'm waiting to get my raindrop socks worked on and done so that I can use those needles. But there is many self-striping socks in my future, as well as just regular socks, I'm sure. Are you a monogamous knitter, or do you like to have lots of projects on the go like me? Please let me know down in the comments below, because this is the end of the knitting section of this podcast. Next, we're going to be talking about books, what I've been reading, what I finished. So if you are only here for the knitting content, thank you so much for joining me. Please like and subscribe and check out my Instagram in the link down below, and I will see you in 2 weeks. So let's get right into this book content. What have I finished? I finished 4 books in the last 2 weeks, 2 of the Heroes of Olympus series, and then the 2 books that last episode I told you weren't very good. I really committed and I finally finished them, and they didn't turn out to be quite as bad as I let on. But I will get to that. Let's start with the Heroes of Olympus. The first one that I finished was the Mark of Athena, and the other one that I finished was the House of Hades. Now again, both of these are by Rick Riordan, and they're part of a greater series. I will be talking about some minor spoilers, or maybe big spoilers, in this finished reading section. So just so you know, if you have any intention of reading these books, I will try and put some timestamps in so you know where you can skip to. But Mark of Athena was a very good book. It was, I think, the most different out of all of the Rick Riordan books that I've read so far. Usually the way that these Rick Riordan books go is there is one main quest that they are going on per book, and they have little things that take them out of their way along the way until they get to the final point, and then they have to fight the big bad, and then they, you know, inevitably beat the big bad, and then they go back to camp. In Mark of Athena, it's the first book of what is definitely the start of a 3-book arc. There's the main mission that is actually taking place over the last 3 books in the series. They do have smaller missions in each of these books that are all ultimately leading up to this main mission, but it's very clear that these are sort of like subplots rather than being main plots. So my only criticism of this book is that at least the mission that Annabeth, the daughter of Athena, went on felt a little bit, it just didn't feel quite as intense as I think it was meant to. Don't get me wrong, she faced broken ankles and spider monsters and vengeful ghosts and all of this, and it was really intense, but it just felt a little bit like somebody should have been able to do this before. The point of her quest was that all through all the ages, through millennia, her brothers and sisters, her half-brothers and sisters from Athena, had all tried to go on this quest and failed, and the point at which they had failed didn't feel like it was difficult enough. It didn't feel like the moment where any Athenian son or daughter would have failed. And so it just made the rest of that part of her quest feel a little bit cheapened. As petty as it sounds, it just didn't feel like she had enough obstacles in her way. Which, again, I know I just said she broke her ankle, she fought a vengeful ghost, she fought a spider lady, but the way that it worked in the story, if she hadn't broken her leg or broken her ankle, it would have been way easier. That's not quite how it's supposed to work, I don't think. The traps that were set shouldn't have been able to anticipate that she would break her ankle. But it's a very, very small complaint. Overall, I loved the book. As always, Rick Riordan is just such an amazing author, and I started House of Hades as soon as I finished Mark of Athena. Now, House of Hades, in my opinion, is the best book yet by Rick Riordan. I love the Percy Jackson series, and especially the very last book in the Percy Jackson series is amazing, but I really loved the House of Hades. It is taking place from several different perspectives again, but 2 different stories are happening. The story of Percy and Annabeth, who are trapped in Tartarus, which is like hell plus. It is hell's own hell. Like, it does not get worse than Tartarus. And they are every moment that they're there basically dying. Then the other story is about the group that's still on the surface. They are trying to get to the House of Hades to get to the Door of Death so that they can be there to, first of all, get rid of the Door of Death, which is currently open and letting monsters spill out of Tartarus, and so that they can also be there to let Annabeth and Percy out when they get to the Doors of Death, which is the only way that these two are going to escape Tartarus. Now, the one thing that I can definitely say for this book is that the cliffhangers were insane. Every chapter seemed to end, or at least every section of chapters would end on a cliffhanger. Every time they moved between the two stories, there was something that was about to go down. They had just run into a giant in Tartarus, and they were about to have to face him, and boom, moved over to the surface, where something intense had just been about to happen. And then as soon as they get through that, and then things have settled down a little bit, and then, oh no, bad thing has happened again, let's move over to the other story. And I have to say, it would have been very easy to do this badly and make me kind of lose track of what was going on in one of the other stories, but it didn't, and that is very impressive. I felt the urgency no matter which story I was reading. Again, I will always love Percy the most, and I loved reading from his perspective the most. I definitely still enjoyed the entire book and all of the other stories. That being said, this was the very last book with any perspectives from Percy Jackson. And I know this because my brother has read these books already. I also looked it up online just a little bit because I wanted to know whose perspective the next book was going to be from. So I know that besides the last book where he is not a point of view character, even if he's important to the story, he is not an important character in the stories in following series. And that makes me so sad. I actually had a book hangover from House of Hades in which I just couldn't pick up the next book in the series because I was so disappointed about the idea that I wouldn't be getting as much from Percy's perspective anymore. And I felt like I had to go through a very small grieving process where I got over the fact that as of right now, there's no other books from Percy's perspective. That's just the way it is, and I need to put on my big girl pants and just get over it. I did have to grieve for that before I was able to pick up the next book, but I have picked that up, and I will talk about that when I get to the what I am currently reading section. A Gilded Cage. I was not very impressed by this book in the last episode. I have to admit that it was not quite as bad as I was making it out to be, at least towards the end. I still don't think that it was a very good book. I definitely am not reading the second one, which is very unusual for me. Usually once I start a book series, I will read it to the end, no matter what. Not with this one. I cannot. Let me give you an example. The supposed, I think, big bad, I'm pretty sure that this was supposed to be the big bad, was introduced 60% of the way into the story, and then he was dispatched so easily. It is just so frustrating when you don't get to know the villain, so you really don't care what happens to them or what their evil plan is. And I don't honestly really care about the main characters either, because nothing ever seems like an actual problem. Nothing in this story ever gets any build-up, so there's never really any payoff. Because we haven't built up to something that I know is supposed to be important. When she defeats the bad guy, or when she escapes from the dragon's cavern, or when she suddenly is able to master her powers or get a spirit animal or anything like that, it doesn't feel earned. I just found the main character really annoying because everything just felt like it was handed to her. Nothing felt like it was ever important because we would always move on to the next plot point so quickly. So still a lot of criticisms. I think I only rated it 2 stars on Goodreads, which it has to be a pretty bad book for me to rate it 2 stars, and it has to be offensive to me to rate it 1 star. So I didn't find it offensive, but it was just not good. Now, The Northern Lights Lodge, on the other hand, this book, again, I said that it wasn't very good. It was more in anticipation of what I expected to happen than what was actually happening, and that wasn't fair. Both characters were hiding something, and I expected there to be this big blow-up where each one was revealed, and I was like, just communicate, just communicate. But actually, very shortly after I finally picked it back up and actually sat down to properly read it, one of the secrets that one of the characters was keeping got revealed. She told her whole story. The other main character was very sympathetic, he had the exact right reaction to it, and then she ended up telling even more characters, which just felt so... Hi. Yes, hi. Can I help you? Sure, Mama, I've had my nap, and now I don't want to nap, which means that you have to play with me. Can you lay down, please? Okay. Yes, thank you. We have a guest host for right now, I suppose. So, she's just gonna hang out. As I was saying, Lucy, the main character, she told her traumatic backstory to not only the main male lead as well, but also to the new female friends that she was making. And we were left with only one secret, which by the time we got to the end of the book, it felt fair enough. But I was a little bit annoyed that that secret was kept. Are we leaving now? Are we laying down? There we go. I have really now one main complaint about this book, and that would be the grammar errors. It's so frustrating when a decent book like this is just riddled with errors. It feels very much like it would have taken just one more read through to catch some of these errors. There were so many places where there was a comma used where it shouldn't be, where there was a word that was in there in both the present and the past tense. Like she wasn't sure what she was gonna do and then accidentally left both. There were just so many little errors. I would say at least one on every page. And it was infuriating to try and read. Maybe I'm being too much of a grammar freak, but I tell you what, it took me out of the story every time. And so I think that it matters. Overall, though, I liked the Happily Ever After. The HEA was extremely cheesy. Honestly, cheesy to the point of being unbelievable. And not even in the resolution of the romance, but actually in her relationship to the new friends that she had made. That felt unrealistic to me, but the relationship felt realistic to me. The two decide that they're going to make a long-distance relationship between Paris and Edinburgh work, and everything works out. I was mostly pleased with that. It was overall a decent book. I'm definitely going to read the next one. So what I'm reading right now is actually a very long list. I think there's 4 or 5 books on this list. I am, of course, reading The Blood of Olympus, which is the very last, it's the 5th book in the Heroes of Olympus. I am trying to be open-minded about the fact that Percy is just not a central character in this story. He's still important, he's still there, he still definitely matters to the story. It just won't be written at all from his perspective, which makes me a little sad. But I'm trying to be open-minded. I am also extremely excited that Nico D'Angelo is getting his own perspective. We get to hear it from his perspective. I am such a Nico stan. Nico is the son of Hades, so he is already an extremely interesting character. He has really dark powers, especially in comparison to the other people in the series. Jason can call down lightning, Percy can control water, and Nico can raise the dead. So it's very interesting to see things from his perspective, especially because he's a bit of an outcast. Hades is not looked upon in a friendly manner in these books. He is very much seen as, if not a villain, an antagonist. Nico takes that in stride. I would not say that Nico is exclusively a good guy. He is very clearly set up to be this sort of gray area. I would say he definitely leans more white on that spectrum, but at one point in the Percy Jackson series, he tricks Percy into going to the underworld because Hades wants to see Percy. Nico has to redeem himself from that. He's not entirely trustworthy. Nobody really knows where his loyalties lie, even though everyone seems to agree that he is there, he's working for the greater good. So I'm really excited that this book seems to have a big focus on Nico. I'm also reading Splendid, as I mentioned in the last episode. There hasn't been enough progress in that book for me to even really talk about it, so I won't. Just in the last week I have also started a nonfiction book, which is very unusual for me, called The Happiness Project by Gretchen Rubin. This is technically a self-help book, but it is basically the only one that I have ever read. I really love the idea of this book. In it, Gretchen Rubin has set out on her happiness project, in which she spends a year working to improve her everyday happiness. She recognizes that she is happy in her life, but she could be happier. And so she tries to do little things to make sure that she is really recognizing the good things that are happening in her life. Now, I don't necessarily agree with every single thing that she says in the book, and I don't think that you're supposed to. But in general, and the general themes of the book, I really, really love. For example, some of the main themes in the book are the days are long, but the years are short. There's my favorite, which is be insert name here. So in the case of the author, it's be Gretchen, and in my case, it's be Emma. And it just basically means don't try to be someone that you're not. And that's not to say that you're not supposed to push yourself, because one of the key parts of the book, or themes of the book, is also growth and how important growth and change is to your happiness. But it's also recognizing that, for example, while I love knitting and I love crochet, I will never be a spinner. And I just don't have any interest in that. And that's okay. Other people can love spinning, and I just don't. And that's okay. And I shouldn't try to make myself like things that I just don't like. Maybe one day I'll enjoy spinning. I will have just changed enough in my mindset that that's the case. But right now, to be Emma, I will not be picking up spinning anytime soon. Another one of her key ideas is that you cannot change others, you can only change yourself. And I know that this is fairly common knowledge. It's not like Gretchen Rubin is saying something that is unheard of or anything like that. It's just something that I do need to be reminded of every once in a while. It's a really good concept to be reminded of. And then, as I said, growth is essential to happiness. So you have to feel like you are moving forward in order to feel and maintain happiness. I have 2 more books to share with you, and they're both fiction books. The first one is Magyk, which, for once, I actually have a hard copy of. This is a book that I read when I was quite young. It's technically a YA book. I haven't read it in years, decades, honestly, but I remember really enjoying it. And it recently came to my attention that there are actually 7 books in this series, and I think I only read like the first 2, maybe 3 if we were pushing it. Might not have even been that. I might have just read this one, but I remember really liking it, and I would really like to read the whole series. That being said, I don't actually remember what it's about. I just remember liking it enough and having like a vague sense of what happens in it to get me to want to read it again. So I found this book on my brother's bookshelf, and he let me borrow it. So what's it about? Okay, so the Heap family have 6 sons, and when their 7th son is born, he is pronounced dead by the midwife and just taken. And it's clear, based on the context of the blurb on the back and everything, that he is not actually dead and something he's been taken somewhere. The series is called Septimus Heap, so it's mostly about him, but it's also about Jenna. Jenna is an abandoned child. Silas Heap, who is the father of the Heap family, finds her abandoned on the side of the road the same day that Septimus is born. He brings her home and they just raise her as their own child. I do not remember at all where Septimus is or what happened with that, so I'm really excited to find out. I do know the secret about Jenna and who she actually is, but I don't remember what comes of it, and you find out who she really is within like the first 3 chapters, but I will not spoil it for you if you have any interest in reading this. One thing that is really interesting, quite unusual about this book that I really love is the font. You can see it's like a fairly standard font. It's a little bit more whimsical, I would say, than normal. My favorite thing is that all of the... Is it gonna focus? So as you can see here, the font, when they're using spells, changes. I don't know if it's just bolding. No. The whole font changes. Okay. And it just feels very whimsical. I really like it. I'm not very far into it, but I get very Studio Ghibli vibes from this book. Just that sort of very fantastical, somewhat childish type of fantasy, I would say. Maybe, I suppose whimsical is the best way to describe it. That's very much what I feel like Studio Ghibli films do. They do this very fantastical world, but they do it in a very whimsical, lighthearted way. And that's definitely the vibes that I get from this. Now, the last book that I am currently reading is called Mrs. Perivale and the Blue Fire Crystal. I am so excited for this book. It's a Kindle book. It's part of Kindle Unlimited, which always makes me just a little bit wary, but I can't help but be so excited for this book. The premise is there's this old woman who's in her 70s who is coming to terms with the fact that she is just not really needed anymore. Her kids have grown. Most people in like her town and stuff, they seem to think that she is too old to really help anyone or to be very useful, and she's struggling with this idea. And then a creature from a magical world comes to her and they tell her that she's the chosen one and that she has to go on a quest to save the world. I'm just in love with this concept, and I'm really, really hoping that it is played out to the fullest. I am cautiously optimistic. I don't want it to take itself too seriously, obviously, because this is a very silly concept. But I also don't want it to be too silly either. There's this very nice middle ground. I feel like it's maybe quite a bit thinner than it is for other books, but there's this nice middle ground where you balance the silliness of the concept with, I suppose, I want it to be genuine. I want it to feel like we're not just throwing this old woman into a story just because it's funny that it's an old woman. I want it to feel genuine. So this woman goes on this quest. She takes with her her butler, and I think it's her 7 cats. It's at least some cats. And again, I'm so excited for it. I've seen concepts like this kind of floated around in like Tumblr sort of spaces where you have the idea of defying tropes. The fact that the chosen one is not some 14-year-old kid or some equally unexperienced person. It's this old woman who has all these years of experience and knowledge and is going into this as a full, mature adult. Because she's having to deal with this idea that she is no longer useful to the people that who used to depend on her, she definitely has growth to do. I hope they don't forget that just because the character is a mature character. But again, I am cautiously optimistic. But that is where I'm going to end it for today. So again, like I told the people that were here just for the knitting content, please like and subscribe. Please comment and check out my Instagram at the link in the description down below. And thank you so much for hanging out with me for this episode, and I will see you guys in 2 weeks.